let's talk about the owners meeting or the league meeting, excuse me. I'm having a hard time. If you go on NFL Network, it's called one thing. If you go on ESPN, it's called another thing. If you look at my badge, it's called a third thing. If you look at it just says NFL meetings in some places. And I'm just like, all right, that's what we're going to call it. We're just going to call it the NFL meetings 2024, the annual meetings, even though they happen 3 times a year, which, I mean, that's not annual. That's triannual.
It's triannual, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what they're getting at here. There was a lot of noise out here. Obviously, some rule changes. I think the big 3 that everybody's going to talk about, the hip drop tackle. I mean, we could dive into that a little bit. It's kind of tough because we don't know how it's going to affect the game. But you look at how it directly impacts the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's hard to come by. So we'll dive into that in a second here. The emergency quarterback, I think, is very, very interesting and a move that will directly impact the Pittsburgh Steelers. We're going to dive into that. And then obviously the kickoff, and we'll try to explain a little bit what's going on there. The hip drop tackle. Your thoughts when that happened? Everybody's upset about it. Art Rooney immediately referred to Le'Veon Bell tearing his ACL in, I believe, 2016 as, we had to remember that, and we've been looking to get rid of it for a long time. It does make the game safer. I don't know, your thoughts when it happened. Defensive players are not happy.
Yeah, does make the game safer, who cares? But I mean, it's I think I understand that part of it. Like it does make the game safer. My only problem with it is that it makes referees' jobs a lot harder, and I don't think that's something that we should be doing at all. I think people are already really upset with how the game is officiated, and I think there are way too many subjective calls that officials have to make or not make throughout the course of a game, and this is just one more that's going to be, it's going to feel like an impossible decision. Like, yeah. I have a hard time understanding what a very clear hip drop tackle is going to be. They showed that video. I mean, that video that the NFL put together made the rounds, and
I thought it was more confusing.
Yeah, there were 8 different kinds of tackles in that video. So I don't really know what a hip drop tackle is. I can't expect that a referee is going to know what a hip drop tackle is, and I cannot expect that there is going to be consistency across the board with how it's called. So I think that is my biggest problem with it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I was kind of for it. I thought it was a bit of an overreaction, but I understood you want to make the game safer. You want guys to get injured less. At the same time, they're trying as hard as humanly possible to avoid taking turf out. So, all right, what are the other things that we can do beforehand to stop ACL tears, blah, blah, blah. Once they showed the video, I looked at it and went, these are not hip drop tackles. Like half of them were just tackles. Like half of them were, if I was 170 pounds and Derrick Henry is running at me, this is the only way I could tackle this man. So this is how I must tackle this man. I don't know. I think it is going to be tough. The refs are already such a controversial part of the game and have such a negative impact a lot of times on these games that I think this is going to be even worse. It's another year where things are going to get really bumpy and there's going to be a lot of mistakes, and then they're going to have to correct it next year because it's so hard to go through it. I don't know. I'm kind of waiting and seeing. This is we'll see how guys adjust and if it does make the game safer. I was looking at a stat. It was like 15 players over the last X amount of years suffered ACL injuries because of this hip drop tackle. And there was like 520 hip drop tackles over that time. And I was like, that just to me seems like a very low number, like a really not a driving force to make such a drastic change number. But I'm not in there. And I don't know. So I think that's a work in progress. We'll see how that works. The emergency quarterback rule, very interesting. Now teams can elevate a practice squad quarterback on game day, unlimited amount of times throughout the season, instead of having to have that emergency quarterback on the roster. For the Pittsburgh Steelers, this immediately impacts how they make decisions because they almost always keep 3 quarterbacks on the active roster. Last year, they kept 3 quarterbacks on the active roster to allow them to have that emergency quarterback. Now you look at it and you say, I mean, we could have a practice squad guy, and you look, there's 2 sides to this. There's if you draft a guy like Joe Milton and you want to put him on your practice squad because you don't think he deserves a roster spot, you want to save a roster spot, cool, but chances are you're going to have to protect that guy on your practice squad every single week throughout the season. He's going to have to be one of those 3 guys that you protect every single week. On the other hand, if you put a guy like Kyle Allen on there, chances are nobody's picking up Kyle Allen. And they're just going to be like, all right, cool, that guy's out there. We have a veteran backup. Who cares? So I think it makes things very interesting for how you build a roster. I don't know. Do you expect change? Do you expect the Steelers to go in a different direction than their typical, we keep 3 quarterbacks, and that's how we operate?
Not really, to be quite honest. I was a little surprised by the Kyle Allen signing. I thought they were going to honestly fill that last spot with a rookie. To be real with you, I thought they were going to draft a guy or sign an undrafted free agent. So I was a little thrown by that, but I don't think this really changes the calculus at all. I do still think they go and get a rookie, either from the draft or an undrafted guy. But I think you're right. Like, Allen is probably the guy that you're sliding into that, just because he's easier to keep around, assuming that you want to keep all 4 of those quarterbacks, 3 or 4, I guess. Allen is the guy that I think is, like, you feel more comfortable just leaving him on the practice squad for a week. A guy like a Joe Milton or a Michael Pratt, I have to run through who the draftable quarterbacks in that range would be. But guys like that, like, those are going to be harder to protect, with given how young they are. There's some guys with some nice tools. Allen doesn't seem as flashy, doesn't seem like a guy that people are going to love. But I think this does give him some more flexibility, if nothing else.
Yeah, I agree. I could look at it and say, if you get an undrafted guy and you think he's cool, you can keep him on the practice squad, get rid of Kyle Allen. If you like, Joe Milton's never going to survive on the practice squad. That'll never happen. I think it rules anybody out. I think the Kyle Allen signing rules out all middle round guys. I think Joe Milton might be the only guy that they'd probably draft because he's going to fall to the 6th or 7th round. Unless he moves his way up. Quarterbacks always move their way up. An undrafted guy I think could work. But I agree. I think if anything, it just saves them a roster spot because they could put Kyle Allen on the practice squad and say, all right, sounds good. Like, there you go. There's our emergency guy. We'll elevate him. At the same time, if you have that roster spot, you now lose an elevation. So you have to take that into consideration. It makes things very complicated, much more complicated than it just says on paper, where it's like, oh, cool. Now you can elevate a guy from the practice squad for your emergency quarterback spot. That's awesome. But now you can't elevate another guy. You're running out of elevations. So you have to take that into consideration and how things work out. And I mean, you can't keep signing and unsigning a quarterback to your active roster. Decisions to make. I'm sure Mike Tomlin, has a plan for this, but I think that's probably the most complicated rule change that will affect the Steelers and how they make decisions over the next couple of months. Very interested to see. I think it gets more interesting after the NFL draft and after rookie minicamp to see, like, oh, okay, what does their quarterback room actually look like right now? Do they have 4 guys? Do they have 3 guys? Who's going to make that final roster spot, or who's going to be that QB3? And if that QB3 is worth a roster spot, do they keep him on or do they put him in the practice squad? I think it's very interesting. Very interesting. And then the kick return rule, I'm not going to break it all down. It is wild, but it's pretty much the kickoff team's going to line up at the 35, I believe. The return team's going to line up at the 40. They're going to kick it. It's got to go into a landing zone. It almost removes fair catches and touchbacks completely from the game, which is great unless you kick it out of the end zone. If the ball rolls into the end zone, you could still pick it up. You still have to pick it up and do something with it, which I think will boost kick returns as well. I think it's just going to add more oomph to a Cordell Patterson. And if you want to read that, I mean, I put up a story trying to explain everything to it. It's complicated and long. Art Rooney was not for it whatsoever. He was very much so again. He just kept saying, he's like, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting. We voted for it, but we didn't want to vote for it. It'll be interesting.
That was crazy that he said that, though, that he was like, we didn't want to vote for it, but it seemed like it was going that way, so we voted for
did
it. I was like, well, why didn't you just not vote for it then? Like, you could have done that if it was already going to get voted for. I don't know.
Hey, but that guy's all about making the peace, and he was like, yeah, I'm not gonna be the lone guy out here, so when I need a favor, I don't get a favor. It was, typical billionaires making billionaire moves to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So the next time that a billionaire needs a billionaire for billionaire help, that billionaire is on that billionaire's side. It's It was like a little mafia move. I think everybody that owns an NFL team, it's just like a little community of today's mafia. That's how I look at it.
Okay.
You need some favors. Yeah, I thought it was interesting. Art said a lot down here. He talked about the hip drop tackle, no international games. He kept saying soon. I don't think there's a chance the Pittsburgh Steelers go international, maybe ever, but like definitely not this year, maybe not next year. They're going to push it out as long as possible. They hate the idea of going international.
Really? Well, I mean, I get it. I get it. Like you lose a home game, like you would run the risk of losing a home game.
Yeah.
Like the Jags had to play two home games in London last year.
In London, and
that
your
would drive
time
me nuts.
That's what I'm saying. And then you got to come back and adjust to the time zone. I think it's a terrible idea. Like,
where would you want to go? Like you personally, where would you want to go? I think it's like Rio, Germany, London, and isn't Mexico? Does Mexico City still have a game?
Mexico City does still have a game, but I don't think they have one this year because they're renovating their field. And then Ireland, I believe, is getting a game.
Yeah.
I would want to go to Dublin, obviously.
Dublin is great, yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely the pick. London would be cool. Brazil didn't really excite me, but maybe a little bit just because, it'd be cool, whatever.
Brazil would be the most interesting.
Yeah, like most random, like, you're never going to plan a trip to be like, or at least me, like, I'm never going to be like, this summer you try and go to Brazil. Like,
yeah.
I don't know, just not on my list of places I would think to go. Mexico City would be my last choice just because, there's not really, it's cool. I heard it's beautiful, but you can't really, like, you're limited on what you can do. And I don't know, like, I feel like you could go to Mexico City anytime. Like, I'm not going out to Dublin to basically just work and have a good time and drink some beers with a bunch of football people. Like, that sounds like a great time to me. Sounds like a great time. I would go Dublin. That would be my one. Who's yours?
I would probably say Dublin too. I mean, Dublin feels like kind of the easiest to, like, most manageable, and if I'm working too, like, you don't have time to explore or anything. So you'd want kind of an easier, more laid back place. And I feel like that's Dublin for you.
That's what I'm saying. I'm just trying to go there, drink my face off, and cover some football. And I think that Ireland fits that almost perfectly.
It's just like Buffalo, That's pretty much without all the snow.
Without the snow. That's exactly what it is. All right. Other things I learned down here. Pittsburgh Steelers believe that they could find a wide receiver in the NFL draft, and that wide receiver could be ready to go week 1 starter, no questions asked. I predicted yesterday that'll be a 3rd round pick. The other thing is that the Pittsburgh Steelers are always cooking and that they're going to continue to cook. And from what I have heard, there are moves in the making that are still being worked on and will continue to be worked on. And this team is nowhere near done adding or losing or manipulating their roster as we approach the NFL draft.